The next time you board a plane from Iberia, Aeromexico, or any other major airline, take a good look at the giant logo painted on the tail. It looks solid, right? It inspires confidence. Well, in many cases, that logo is basically a luxury sticker on a rental car. A car that costs more than $100 million and flies at 900 kilometers per hour. Because the harsh truth is that almost half of the commercial airplanes in the world don't belong to the airlines that operate them. They're leased. The airlines own the paper napkins, the mediocre catering, and the overproduced safety videos. But the flying machine you trust your life to, that one often belongs to someone else. This has created a multi-billion-dollar industry hidden in plain sight, a business of celestial landlords who make fortunes without ever having to deal with a passenger complaining about the lack of legroom. So how on earth did we get to this point where flying is like using a car-sharing service at 30,000 feet? There was a time, the so-called golden age of aviation, when flying was an event. People dressed elegantly, the seats were like sofas, and airlines were symbols of national pride. In the 1970s, airlines in the United States owned practically all of their planes. They were like Funko Pop collectors. They wanted to have them all. The government heavily regulated routes and fares, but in exchange, it gave them subsidies to cover the less profitable routes. Essentially, the government had put training wheels on the airline's bicycle. Competition was limited, financial risk was minimal, and profits were almost guaranteed. It was a stable, predictable business and, let's be honest, a little boring. But everything changed in 1978. That was the year the Airline Deregulation Act was passed in the United States. Overnight, the government took off the training wheels. Now they could fly wherever they wanted and charge whatever the market dictated. But the subsidies were gone. The financial lifeline disappeared. It was as if a spoiled child was suddenly told they had to start paying rent. Suddenly, airlines had to really compete, optimize costs, and for the first time, face the real risk of bankruptcy. And it was precisely in that chaos that a few saw a golden opportunity. How do you survive in such a brutally competitive market? Imagine you're the chief operating officer of a new airline. Let's call it Fly Duck Airlines. You need a fleet to get started. A single Airbus A321neo, a super popular single-aisle plane, costs about $130 million. And you need, let's say, 20 of them to even start being relevant. That's a bill of $2.6 billion. No airline, especially a new one, has that kind of money stashed under the mattress. You could finance it, of course, but that would mean a massive down payment and monthly installments that would drown you before you even sold your first ticket. And the worst part, even if you had the money, the waiting list for a new plane from Airbus or Boeing is almost 10 years. It's like trying to buy a PlayStation 5 at launch but on an industrial scale. This is where the business trick comes in, the model that changed everything, operating leasing. In 1973, three immigrants founded a company called International Lease Finance Corporation. Their idea was simple but brilliant. They bought the planes and rented them to airlines for a monthly fee. Suddenly, Vuela Pato Airlines didn't need $2.6 billion, just enough money for the first month's rent. For the airline, the cost of renting a plane, which can range from $400,000 to $1 million a month, becomes an operating expense, like fuel or salaries. An expense that, moreover, is tax deductible. They get rid of the headache of debt, asset depreciation, and the risk that your $100 million plane will become obsolete in 15 years. The plane is no longer your problem, it's the landlord's problem. Is this business model exclusive to aviation? This trick of outsourcing the ownership of extremely expensive assets is more common than you think. Think about the big tech companies. Many of them don't own the gigantic data centers that host their services. They rent them from specialists like Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure. Large construction companies often rent heavy machinery for specific projects instead of owning a fleet of million-dollar excavators gathering dust. Even the freight trains you see crossing the country. They are often owned by rail leasing companies, not by the companies transporting the goods. In any industry where equipment is absurdly expensive and flexibility is key, you'll find this model of renting instead of buying. It's the smart way to focus on your core business, which for an airline is selling tickets and charging you extra for your carry-on bag. But what happens when things go wrong? Who is responsible if one of these leased planes has a serious problem? Let's remember the Boeing 737 MAX disaster. Hundreds of planes were grounded worldwide for almost 2 years due to design flaws. For the airlines that owned those planes, it was a financial nightmare. A $100 million asset that not only wasn't generating revenue, but actually cost money just to keep parked. However, for the airlines that had them on lease, the situation was different. They had a bargaining chip. They could pressure the leasing companies to renegotiate contracts or seek compensation. And it was the leasing companies that had to deal directly with Boeing. The risk had been transferred. Legally, the most common type of contract is the dry lease, where the airline is 100% responsible for the maintenance, crew, and operation of the plane. In the tragic case of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, the plane didn't belong to the airline but to ILFC. After the accident, the lessors are legally protected and the responsibility falls almost entirely on the airline. At what scale does this hidden industry operate? At a scale that will blow your mind. Today, nearly 60% of the world's aircraft fleet is leased. In regions like Europe or Latin America, that figure exceeds 70%. The largest company in the sector is called AerCap. It doesn't ring a bell, does it? Well, it's headquartered in Dublin and owns more than 1,700 aircraft. In other words, a single company that nobody knows about has a fleet larger than American Airlines, Delta, and United combined. And here comes the interesting fact. If you look at the largest leasing companies, 14 out of the top 15 are based in Ireland. Coincidence? Not at all. Ireland has a corporate tax rate of 12.5%, almost half of that in the United States. In addition, it has tax treaties with more than 70 countries, which prevents double taxation and lowers leasing contract costs. It's basically a tax haven for aircraft owners. So airlines use the leasing trick to avoid risks. But is there any hack for us, the passengers? The heist-style trick here isn't for us, but for the airlines themselves. They found a way to enjoy all the benefits of a modern fleet without the burden of ownership. For you, the practical advice is simple. Don't obsess over who the legal owner of the plane is. Safety doesn't depend on the ownership title, but on the airline that operates the plane and the civil aviation regulations of its country, which are incredibly strict. The airline whose name is on the fuselage is the only one responsible for maintenance and safety. So, instead of Googling the name of the lessor, it's better to check the airline's safety record. That will actually give you peace of mind. How is it possible that such a gigantic and crucial industry operates from such a conveniently legal vacuum? It's not so much a loophole as it is a deliberate design. The creation of this tax haven in Ireland was a very smart lobbying and economic policy strategy. By standardizing aircraft depreciation rules and offering a tax-friendly environment, Ireland attracted an entire global industry. For years, there was an accounting trick that made this even more attractive. Lease payments did not appear as debt on the airline's balance sheets. This made the companies look financially much healthier than they really were, with less visible debt for investors. Regulations have changed and now require more transparency, but the core business model remains the same. A brilliant way to dress up finances and outsource risk. The fear of a recession, a pandemic, or a massive technical problem like Boeing's makes the convenience of a monthly lease the magic solution. The dark side of all this is not so much fraud, but rather a matter of perception. Airlines spend billions on marketing to build a brand and generate trust. They sell you the idea that you're flying with them, with their expertise, their safety, their prestige. But in reality, the relationship is more like the one you have with an Uber driver. He doesn't own the car, and the platform just connects the pieces. The plane is the hardware, the airline is the software, and the brand is the user interface. The entire design of the experience, from the crew uniforms to the color of the cabin lighting, is intended to make you forget that you're inside a financial asset owned by an investment fund based in Dublin. It's a large-scale corporate magic trick. So, the next time you're sitting on a plane, remember that sticker on the tail is much more than just a logo. It's the symbol of one of the greatest financial tricks in modern history. A business model that proves that sometimes, to build a global empire, the smartest move isn't to own everything, but simply to look like you do. It's proof that in modern capitalism, real power doesn't lie in ownership, but in controlling risk. And now I ask you, does knowing this change your perception of the safety or trust you have in airlines? And in what other industry do you think a business model as counterintuitive as this one might be hidden? By the way, if your mind was blown discovering how airlines avoid the problem of owning assets that lose value every second, you have to watch our video on why obsolescence is out of control. I promise that after watching it, you'll never look at your smartphone the same way again.